Okay, good morning. So make sure that you schedule something with me for your conferences. That would be important. So email that to me as soon as you can, so I can start making schedules for that and put you into the Zoom. And then those should last about 15 minutes. We'll talk about the final project, and then we'll set up more conversations if we need to out of that meeting. So we have still a few questions that are about this book, For Reincarnations, and I think they're great questions, and I want to address some of them this morning and show you some more research and some more ideas about how we can form an argument about a book that's incredibly difficult to read in a lot of ways. And I said in the earlier videos that one of the things that I think Max Ritvo does is he has a tendency to write poetry in a way that a lot of people find poetry problematic, which is that he's circular. He doesn't, or he's really not really even circular, he's more like tangential. He doesn't speak directly at the issue at stake in the poems necessarily. He writes around them and these associative kinds of experiences. So instead of saying that, the example I always give in classes, and I may have given it already, and my apologies if I have, is that instead of saying I'm sad, which is a really easy, understandable concept, right? On its surface, it's just to say that somebody is sad. He doesn't say that. And he says something else. He shows us an image, or he gives us language or an action that we don't typically associate with sadness. But because it's not supposed to be associated with sadness. And I'm not saying that he talks about sadness, but just as an example for this one, when we talk about something like sadness, for instance, um, so language will suggest that when I say that, you and I will agree on its meaning, right? That's not necessarily a complicated premise, right? I say I'm sad, you understand that emotional experience and process it however you're going to, empathetically or ignoring it. But what a poem does, and what a Max Ritvo poem does, and I think in all good poems do it to a degree, Max Ritvo goes to a certain space on the spectrum of literal meaning. Is instead of just saying I'm sad, he tries to show us something that's unique enough and complex enough to represent the kind of sadness that he has. Because what's interesting about this phrase, I'm sad, this statement, is that it suggests a universality and a singularity of this emotional experience of sadness. So in other words, when when we're in just a normal conversation, we say an idea like sadness, and what we agree on is that there's this area of reality that that word embodies. And in that space, we understand it as a kind of like negative emotion. And so it's like a drape, right? Like a gray drape on the day. Like I'm sad, and here's the grayness of that. But the truth is that there are so many different versions of sadness, and we have different words for them, more specific words. And instead of him trying to just give you this universal singularity, which is not real in any sense, because your sadness is different than my sadness, and my sadness about dropping an ice cream cone is different than my sadness about not having daycare, which is different than my sadness that my grandfather died when I was younger. These are all different sadnesses, but we use the same word, generally speaking, and that's the generality of it. So what Ritvo does is he instead tries to embody it with his own reality and make an image that makes us sit there and wonder about it for a moment. And in that wondering, we get a real singular experience of him, of like, this is his kind of sadness, which embodies a lot of different things, right? There's anger in here, there's frustration in here, there's loneliness. There's a real sense in the second section of like, kind of not, how like unrequited physical attraction. Like there's love and sex, and he's heartbroken in the sadness, and he's frustrated by it, and he's lonely by it, and he's frustrated by his loneliness. And there's all of this, and that's all going under this like sort of sad umbrella. So that's a long way to explain, I think, to some degree. I don't know, not incredibly well, I'm sure, that he's not just simply going to tell us, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm mad, I'm worried, I'm going to die. He's going to try and show us things that are really complex in this regard. So one of the questions that kept showing up in the response journals after the second section is like, who is Randal? How do we read Randal, and who are these characters? So I read the second section. Right, I'm looking at it. He shows up a lot. My instinct with Randal is to say that he sort of embodies to me like a was it Jody in the Marines? I think if you look at like old like from, I don't know if this is still true or not, but like when soldiers are shipped out or whatever, they would have this old joke about, and some of their their rhymes that they do whenever they're on uh, they're hiking or whatever, that Jody would come and steal their girl, right? And Jody is this character who's like the guy who stays at home, who is just sort of like kind of unethical and like takes these women, which of course is a very gendered problematic image regardless. But this idea of like there's a character out there who is going to take advantage of the absence of somebody, right? Who's like more of an appropriate partner, right? And then sort of sneaks in. And Randall to me reads like that. Randall to me reads like this embodied version of another person who may be real, maybe not, but it's like this fear voice in the speaker's head of saying like, I'm the one who's going to live your life when you're done. And I'm the one who can make your wife happy when you're gone. And I'm the one who is, you know, the interesting, attractive version who's going to live version of you, who is this sad and sick individual. And you know, causing, and from the first section, causing the sad, sick individual who's causing a lot of pain to the people who he says I love, and who they say back that they love him. So here's this character who sort of jumps in and is like, hey, by the way, I'm not any of those things. I'm all of the other things. I'm like healthy and present and here and easy and kind and like sexually active, right? Which is that made some of us uncomfortable when we read this part. I completely understand that. But I think there's this space of like, this is this young person who's involved in a romantic relationship. And part of that romantic relationship is eros, is like erotic love and attraction. And it's in this space in here. He doesn't say he can't fulfill that, but there is this space in there where Randall seems that he's much more capable of doing that one. So, I mean, this is a kind of dark way to look at this. And so what I want to look at is To Randal Crow Stealer, Lord of the Greenhouse. And, you know, that's like almost a fantastical, mythical sort of title in that space. The poem right before this is For Crow on page 23. And, you know, he says in this one, we should go a few more minutes and then I'll end this video. He says in For Crow that we tended to a crow and now it's fine. So the we is back, right? The present. And I have a picture of the next poem, but I just want to read this real quickly. You know, 2 stanzas down from that, stanza 3, the very first line is, I am a crow, and I think you're mostly a pattern of motion, and I am a leaf, right? So he becomes the crow in this poem. And then in the very next poem, Randall, this ode to Randall, he's a crow stealer and Lord of the Greenhouse. That to me is part of where I started feeling like there's this battle between them. Like Randall's the person. It kind of reminds me, probably incorrectly, like of a sort of a Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk, like who is Tyler Durden. You know, here's like the interesting. Here's the character of. Well, if you've watched the movie, he's like the Ed Norton character, and well, I won't do that. Actually, it's a spoiler. You may not know to watch Fight Club. The point is that like it's this voice that comes in who's more powerful and more interesting, and stole the speaker's life, and now he's going to come back into this one. So, but that's how I'm going to read that, and I'm going to look at that poem in a little bit with you a little bit more closely. The videos may come in a little bit later today as we try to figure out our time with our son. But one thing I wanted to show you when I was working on this morning is one of the first things I did was I was curious about if anybody knew who Randall was in For Reincarnation. So I just straight up Googled it. I just straight up Googled it. Sorry, I don't know why I said it like that. Anyway, there's a number of really good book reviews pop up. Meridian is a great journal. A journal is a place where you submit creative material. They sort of judge whether or not they think that matches the aesthetic of their space, do editor processes, and then they publish it. And they do book reviews often. So he's got one here, which I read, as you can tell. Tethered by Letters, that's going to be a blog more than a .com, more than anything else. This is a .org, and this is a .org IO review, and so is Kindred Review is .org. So usually if it has a review in the title, that's a pretty good source. But my point is that I didn't go through all of them, but I went through the first of them, and I noticed something in them. So I won't read this to you. This is a really solid review. You can absolutely look at it. So this is kind of what I was talking about yesterday with the relatability of this one. But he mentions, this one does, they mention To Randal Crow Stealer, Lord of the Greenhouse. So I started thinking like, oh, I'm going to read this to see what this is saying about Randall, and then just nothing, right? Nothing at all about Randall. So I then, I'm over here into the aisle review. This is a really fun one. It's kind of almost like a interview. He's got some great quotes in here. Also some examples of some references you can look at for research. So this is a great review to look at if you're interested in this one. He also mentions a painter. So I think this is a cool resource at all as well. But if you look at, I started reading through this one and there's like no mention of Randal. And that's where I thought, he mentions a ton of things in here. This is really this is a great review. This is a super strong review. But again, here we have it. To Randal Crowstealer, Lord of the Greenhouse. No mention of Randal, though we hear him twice. And so it feels like there's nobody really wants to make a claim about who this Randal character is. So if you're confused by him, it seems like so are the reviewers. They're not even touching him. So don't feel bad. You're on the same boat. But those are good reviews to look at. The next video will look a little bit more closely at the poem itself. Hope you're doing well. I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.